Okay, I'm recording this. Hello, my name is Jessica and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Big Book Workshop of Joe and Charlie. We as leaders do not consider ourselves to be the gurus of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We do not consider ourselves to be experts in anything at all. For those who care to, please join me in a moment of silence to remind us of why we are still here and for the alcoholic who is still suffering. Now, if you'd like to join me in the workshop prayer, God, let me set aside everything I think I know about you, AA, myself, and my disease for an open mind and a new experience. Let me be honest and thorough. Amen. For the first couple of weeks, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves in order to get to know one another. Obviously, we are not going to do that because I'm recording this by myself. The purpose of this workshop is to experience the recovery process as outlined in the Big Book of AA, either for the first time or again, so that we may better carry out and understand our primary purpose, which is to stay sober and carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. We are here to talk about recovery only and to go through the 12-step process as outlined in the Big Book of AA. This is not an emotional or intellectual exercise. This is a spiritual exercise so that we can all recover and experience the recovery process as we read it together. It is recommended that anything you hear here that cannot be reconciled in the Big Book 12 and 12 or any AA-approved literature simply be ignored. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here and pull up week 7. We are on chapter 5 of How It Works, which is step 3. So let me just pull that up here. Bear with me. Oh, I gotta close this. Okay, perfect. Now, as we have completed the chapter to We Agnostics, we have laid the foundation and have established the first 2 steps. Keeping in mind the problems Bill was having for the first 40 people, writing the Big Book was quite a task. Bill was writing the book in Hank's office in New Jersey, and his secretary, Ruth Hawk, would type these chapters out as Bill stood behind her. As these chapters were finished, they were sent to the Akron and New York groups. The groups would go over each chapter and every word. This was a real task, and we didn't know how they all went through it to get this book written. Ruth said that she had typed this manuscript 40 times before it was finally printed. Bill had completed the first 4 chapters and felt the groundwork had been laid. He felt it was now time for the main purpose of the book, to show alcoholics how to recover. Prior to reading this chapter, he was having trouble. He prayed for guidance and laid down. After a few minutes, he picked up his pad and pencil and began to write. He said it seemed as though his pencil had its minds of its own. Within 30 minutes, he had written How It Works and the 12 steps. He didn't really know how many steps he needed as he started. He had the 6 steps from the Oxford group. He knew the steps needed expanding in order to close the loopholes the drunks would jump through. When he finished a number of them, he noticed there were 12 steps, and this equated with the 12 apostles. He had just finished the steps when Howard, a New York member, stopped by to see him. Bill, a newcomer, with him. They took a look at the steps, and neither one of them liked them. Both of them started giving Bill hell about the steps. You know how alcoholics are. They don't like change. They had 6 steps in the Oxford group, and they didn't care for him doubling the steps. How would you feel if you went into a meeting and all of a sudden you had 24 steps? There would be a lot of discussions and arguments in the groups. This crisis was probably one of many when writing the Big Book. The writing of the book stopped, and they went through a great dilemma. Some changes were made, and they were able to go on with the book. Now we're going to read what Bill wrote that night as it appears in the original manuscript. Chapter 5, How It Works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to the simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. They are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you've decided what we want, what we have, and we are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for you. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stern at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and compare with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as your program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God and direction of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and furious moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. 7, humbly, on our knees, asked him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people ever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had the spiritual experience as a result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Ooh, well, you may exclaim, what an order, I can't go through it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to mean anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is, we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas: that you are an alcoholic and can't manage your own life, that 2, probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism, and 3, that God can and will. If you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. So we think in the final statement, Bill makes it pretty clear that he's been trying to convey to us that he has been using the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters to sell us 3 pertinent ideas. Those 3 pertinent ideas are contained in steps 1 and 2. So if you're not convinced, you should reread the book again or throw it away. The very next thing he is going to start us is on step 3. If you don't have steps 1 and 2, you can't do step 3. Before the book was written, they would go to the hospitals, jails, wherever, by sharing their stories, and they would convince him that he was an alcoholic also. Talking through the disease, the physical allergy, and the obsession of the mind, they could help see his problem and take step 1. Then they would ask if they could come back in a day or 2. They would return and begin talking about spirituality, telling him they had found it necessary to find a power greater than human power and how to apply it in their lives to recover. They would help the alcoholic that had already identified with them, and they'd be which we would know today as step 2. And then we'd take him to the Oxford meeting. They invited him to the meeting, and they would tell him that they've been talking to him and are convinced, and that he knows he's an alcoholic, and that he believes God can restore him to sanity. So we want to sponsor him into the group. That is what sponsorship was back then. They would, the group would vote on whether or not to take him into the group. And then it was voted on by the group. 2 or 3 of them would take him upstairs in Dr. Bob's house. And then they would get on their knees and they would make his surrender, which we know today as step 3. So if you're sold on steps 1 and 2 and you're ready to take step 3, from step 3 on, the book tells us with every step that you need, or why you need to take it, how to take it, and what the results will be. It does not do that with steps 1 and 2 because they're not working steps. Steps 1 and 2 are conclusions of the mind. I like that. I've never heard it that way. And we draw based upon the information presented to us in the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. I also think it's clear that Bill meant for these steps to be a set of individual directions for the individuals to recover, because he kept saying you. He did not call them suggestions. He called them directions. The rest of the fellowship was immediately upset when they saw this. Changing step 6 to 12 was bad enough, but what they didn't really like was the word directions. They said, Bill, you can't give an alcoholic direction. If you try, he won't do a damn thing. Yes. Another bunch said it wasn't strict enough. So they went back and forth. They said, instead of saying you had to, let's change it to we, and we had to. Bill didn't want to change anything, but the group insisted, and it was their book, not his. Finally, Bill realized he was going to have to accommodate their wishes. With the suggestion of a non-alcoholic psychiatrist, they made some changes, and they decided to drop directions and make suggestions, and quit saying you, and say we, and quit saying must and use ought. People use a book a little more, and as a compromise between fundamental Christians and atheists, they decided on God as we understand him. Now, oh, I am sorry I have not flipped the page here in quite a while. Bear with me here. We're on the last paragraph here. So, Bill is a real alcoholic, and alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. He said, okay, I agree to your changes, but I'm going to make a deal with you right now. I'm tired of fighting over this book. I'm not going to fight with you anymore. If I am to finish the book, you will have to let me be the final authority from here on out. They didn't want to write it either, so they let Bill be the final authority from then on. What Bill knew is that they didn't, he was going to put in the word directions in the back of the book, just 2 pages later. The rest of the way through the book, he used words you and must also. This is the story of how it works and as it is written today. It's such an alcoholic thing to do. Okay, now it wants us to read pages 60, paragraph 3. Page 6 in the book, paragraph 3. Being convinced we were at step 3, which is what we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? And then it says, move on to paragraph 4. The first requirement is that we be convinced of any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Some people try to live by self-propulsion. Each propulsion is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. It's forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballad, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. So there are 3 words in step 3 that need to be defined, and we can understand them as the writer understood them, and then it makes step 3 easier. So decision, the definition is the word decision implies that there is going to be further action. 2, the word will. My will is nothing more than my mind, the power of choosing my actions or my thoughts. And life. My life is nothing more than my actions. What I am today is a sum total of all the actions I have taken throughout my life. One of the problems many of us had in step 3 is that if we take step 3, we will turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. But the step said we make, in parentheses, made a decision to do that. If we could turn it over in step 3, we wouldn't need the rest of the steps. If we make a decision to do something, we're going to need to take certain action. The action is needed is steps 4 through 9. All action is born in thought. I'll say that again. All action is born in thought. If the action is then right, the actions are right, and usually the life is okay. If the thinking is lousy, the actions are lousy, and life is going to be hell in a handbasket. So continuing on reading page 60. Lost my page here. Where it says most people try to lead by self-propulsion. Each propulsion is like an actor who wants to run the whole show and is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballot, and the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. And then page 62, paragraph 3. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next time, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father. We are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant art which we passed to freedom. So again, we can see that he's adding to the spiritual structure. In step 1, willingness was the foundation. In step 2, he was believing that the cornerstone, and we didn't know what we were building. So in step 3, he's telling us that we're building an arch for which we pass to freedom. Step 3 is the keystone to the arch. So we gain another stone in the structure. The keystone is supporting stone at the arch, which the stone that holds the arch together. So see the diagram on page 53. So I'm going to scroll to that. The decision is a stone arch right there. Believing is the cornerstone, and willingness is the foundation, the arch to which we pass to freedom. Okay. I lost my train of thought here. Read page 63, paragraph 1. When we sincerely took a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, and as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear today, tomorrow, hereafter, and were reborn. That is so true, and I love that paragraph on page 63, paragraph 1, where it says, where did it go? Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work. So in my sobriety, I noticed that, when I'm playing God and running the show and controlling everything, I don't really get what I need from life. I feel like I'm kind of going against the grain and nothing is going my way, even though I'm forcing it. But that when I, take the suggestions and remember that God's in control, the God of my understanding, and I'm remaining close to that, I feel like the things in my life, are given to me and they're what I need. So that's one of my favorite paragraphs in the big book. Now continuing on. So we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. This was only a beginning, though if honesty and humbly made, in effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. Now, reviewed the chart, road to decisions on page 54 of the workshop handout. Let me flip back to page 54. That's not going to be on the screen here. Oh, the solution. It was just this on page 54 in your book. I don't know if you can see it. My screen cuts it out of there. Okay, so now we are ready to take step 3. Many groups take this step together and recite the prayer that is set forth on page 63 at this time, which is the step 3 prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of thy power, thy love, and of thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Now there's a big book workshop assignment. So it says to continue page reading 63, paragraph 4 through the end of the chapter. You'll be prepared to discuss step 1 in the inventory guide, and then you should be prepared to start your step 4 next week. So I'm going to fast forward through this here. Okay. So, on the back of page 45, it said the main object of this book was to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which would solve my problem. And Bill's going to sit down here and he's going to do some of the best spiritual information the world's ever seen in just a little formula, or proposals, as he calls them, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can see why Bill, with the problem that he has, you've got Protestants in AA, we've got Catholics in AA, we've got Jewish people in AA, we have a sprinkling of Muslims in AA, we have some Buddhists come into AA at that time. How are you going to write a set of steps or proposals that's not going to offend these people? Quite a chore for a guy like Bill or anybody, to tell you the truth. The Oxford groups are coming from the first century Christianity. They had those 4 absolutes and they were really, really strong. They won't give you any slack at all. They were more interested in the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. Bill was interested in the spirit of these things rather than the letter of them, and that's why it's a spiritual program. So Bill had one gigantic problem here to write these steps in order, to such a manner that they wouldn't offend anybody. And he accomplished the 12 by doing that through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. These 4 absolutes that the Oxford group said you had to practice were absolute love, absolute purity, absolute honesty, and absolute unselfishness. These alcoholics were having a hell of a time being absolute anything except absolute drunks, And they said we need to get rid of that kind of stuff. So they made their own little steps, which is 6 of them that came from the Oxford group tenons. And Bill could see these loopholes in these steps that the alcoholic mind was slipping through, and he knew that they were going to have more strength and they were going to have to be expanded, but he didn't know how far. So in trying to satisfy that bunch and trying to satisfy the people from different religions, he tried to satisfy those that didn't want God in here. And Bill had a terrible time with that. By the time AA had divided into what you might say 3 factions. In Akron, where Dr. Bob was, and they didn't have a problem with God. Dr. Bob was highly religious man. He used the Bible, and he insisted that everybody he worked with used the Bible. God was no problem in there. But the New York City people were an entirely different breed of cat. They didn't want anything to do with God if they could avoid it. They have preferred a book dealing with the mind rather than the spirituality, period. There was finally a third fraction that said, let's talk about God, but let's not put him in there too much. Let's come down to something in the middle. So Bill's trying to satisfy them all, and he tried and tried and tried and he said it in chapter 5. This is going to be the directions on how to recover. And he said, I simply can't do it. And he said one night while he was laying in bed with a pillow against his back on the headboard and it had a pen and pencil, he was trying to start step 5. Finally, he just gave up. He put the pad down and pencil and prayed to God and asked for help and direction, and then meditated for 10 or 15 minutes. After a while, I reached over and picked up the pad and pencil, and it felt as if the pencil had a mind of its own and raced across the pages. In less than 30 minutes, Bill had written How It Works. It's one of the greatest pieces of spiritual information the world has ever seen. And at the time, and he went back and numbered these proposals, and he found that there were 12. He didn't set out to write 12. He went back and numbered them, and there was 12. So almost immediately after having done this, somebody knocked on the door. One of the guys in the New York City group had one of his sponsees with him, and they said that Bill stayed up late working on the book anyhow, and so they had. They'd come by to see Bill on their way home. Next page. Bill could hardly wait to show him the work to the older member. Look at the new 12 steps. The older member said, what in the hell is this? We only had 10 commandments, and now you've got 12. 6 has been sufficient for everything up until now. I don't like it at all. The fight was on. They fought and fought until Lois came in and gave him a cup of coffee and had them settle down. Then Bill presented How It Works to the other members, and that's when the crap really hit the fan. They began to say, Bill, this sounds too much like the Oxford group absolutes. You're going to have to get rid of some of that stuff out there. You're going to have to give directions to people, and you're not going to have the right to tell anybody what they have to do. And Bill this and Bill that and Bill this and Bill that. And they almost destroyed not only for what the book project was, but the little fellowship it had in the entirety. So you can imagine what kind of fight you would have left if there was today and you went back to your group and all you had was 12 steps and then you left, but like you had 24. There'd be little fighting going on, don't you think? That's what Bill was up to. So let's read How It Works, which most of you have probably heard before, the original manuscript as we read through. You think you'll see some differences between what Bill wrote that night and what the fellowship forced him to change and what we have today. So let's go through it just a moment and see the differences. So in the original manuscript, it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. And it's changed to path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not give themselves to the simple program. They're men and women usually constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. They're such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life, which is now a manner of living, which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover as they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided what we want and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions, which is now take certain steps. At some of those you balked, which is now we balked. You may think you can, which is now we thought we could, find an easier, softer way. But we doubt if you can, which is we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the results were nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with, which is now we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much for you, which is now us. but there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must, which is now, may you find him now. Half measures will avail you, which is now availed us, nothing. You stand, which is now we stood at the turning point. Throw yourself under, which is now we asked, his protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can't take it. So here are the steps which are suggested as your program of recovery, which I'm not going to read these 12 steps again. We already did, but we did see the difference where in step 3, it originally said we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care and direction of God as we had understood him, which it no longer has direction in there. In step 6, there was the change. It says we are entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. It used to say willing, where you can see here. And step 7 has been changed as well. It originally read humbly on our knees to ask him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back, which is 7 is now just humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And step 8, they removed the word complete here. It just says willing to make amends to them all. And step 12 is having had a spiritual awakening, not experience, as a result of these steps, where he set a course of action, which is essentially the same thing, and carry this message to other alcoholics is what that's been changed to. So now you make exclaim, or many of us exclaim, what an order, I can't go through of it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has maintained anything like perfect adherence to these principles. Well, we already read all of this too, so I'm just going to kind of skim through. This is just basically saying all of the changes that were there previously. So that can be for your own personal reference. So if you're not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. You could see that Bill's intention was not suggestions. He was going to give us real directions on how to work the steps, when to work the steps. He was giving us precise, specific, clear-cut directions on how to do that, and he was very adamant about it. But the crap hit the fan, and they made the decision that some changes in this original How It Works, the chapter How It Works, that had demanded to make changes, that were forced upon Bill. So Bill made a little compromise. He said, I'll make these changes from now on, and I will complete the rest of the book, or else you can do it. Well, they didn't want to write the rest of the book. They wanted Bill to. So to continue to do that, they agreed to continue to let Bill write the rest of the book without much interference on their part. So I can see that Bill, when he wrote this, gave it to them and began to fight and argue over it, and they began to tell him he's going to have to change it. Remember, Bill's stubborn and bullheaded just like the rest of us. And he said, no, I'm not going to change this. And they said, well, Bill, you are. Don't you remember? This isn't your book. It's our book. And the deal we made to begin with. And he said, well, that doesn't make a difference. I'm going to change a part of this book. And they said, well, you are going to change it. And he said, what you guys don't realize is these aren't my words anyhow. These are God's. And they came after prayer and meditation. And they said, we don't give a damn whose words they are. It's our book and you're going to change it. So Bill finally realized that if he didn't compromise, they would destroy the project and maybe the whole fellowship. So there was a non-alcoholic psychologist in those days, and he made the suggestion. He said, why don't you change the directions to suggestions, and you'll get your meaning across to people, and they'll probably accept it. Where you're saying you do not do that. Tell them when you tell them what they have to do, change all of that to we. Say this is what we had to do, and you'll get your message across, and more people will accept it. And he said, where you're saying must, you change that to ought, and ought will be more acceptable. Bill very reluctantly made the changes. Now, today, we don't know if they had made the changes, if they left it like originally, maybe instead of 2 million worldwide, we'd have 10 million. But also, if we didn't make the changes, instead of 2 million worldwide, we might only have 10,000. Who knows? Nobody knows. We just know this is the history behind this particular part of the book. Bill was cunning, baffling, and powerful also. He said, okay, I'm going to compromise with you, but you are going to have to compromise with me. And they said, what do you want? And he said, I'm tired. I've fought with all of you, and I'm going to fight. If you want me to finish the book, give me the authority to do so. If you don't want to give me the authority, then you finish the book. They didn't want that authority, and they didn't want to finish the book either, so they very reluctantly agreed to that. What Bill knew that they didn't know is that 2 pages later, he is going to put directions and you and must right back in the book. He's had it in there, the book, all the way to how it works. They jerked it out and then he puts it back in and ruins some of the continuity of the book, but we see what happened and it makes more sense. The other thing is that this is so apparent when he says back here about 3 pertinent ideas. Our decision of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and the personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you, which is now make clear, 3 pertinent ideas. He's talking about the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters and the stories in the back of the book. Now, we've been sold on those 3 pertinent ideas that A, we are alcoholics and could not manage our own lives. B, that if we come to believe that no human power could relieve our alcoholism and that God can and will, then we were through our second step. So now the very next statement says, if you're convinced you are now at step 3, you see the fallacy of trying to start somebody in chapter 5 and then it starts at step 3. It's hard to start with step 3 unless you've got 1 and 2 behind you. People come to us today and say, well, how do you work steps 1 and 2? You don't. They're not working steps. There's no action involved here. These are conclusions of the mind, and we draw based upon information presented to us in the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. I've always been powerless over alcohol, because of that, and my life has been unmanageable. I just didn't know that, nor did I know why until I read the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. There's always been a power greater than I am that could restore me to sanity. I just did not believe that he would, nor did I understand the insanity until I read the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. If I can say to myself, I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable, I'm through step 1. If I can say to myself today, I've become to believe there is a power greater than I am that can restore me to sanity, then we're through step 2. Now I'm ready to look at step 3. Now I can make a decision. So page 60, paragraph 3, I believe we read that. Let me just glance back through here really quick. Yes, we did. So we haven't took step 3 yet. We were just there. In the big book, paragraph 60, it says, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? Well, that's a very good question, isn't it? What does step 3 mean? Well, we're going to make a decision. That's part of it. To do what? To turn our will. And what is our will? Our will is our thinking, and our life is our actions. So we're going to make a decision to turn our thinking and our actions over to the care and direction, which is what the step used to say, to God as we understand him. Our will is our thinking, our life is our actions. We are going to make a decision to let God direct our thinking and direct our life in step 3. We haven't done that yet, but we are getting willing to do that. And I've heard a lot of people say that one of the most understood steps in the big book is step 4, and I'll agree with that. But I don't think step 4 is any more misunderstood than step 3 is. And I hear people say, "Oh, I've been in AA 5 years, my life is all screwed up, and I don't understand why, because I turned it to God 3 years ago when I took step 3." Now, we don't turn anything over to God in step 3. We make the decision to do something in step 3. And the decision itself implies we're going to take some further action to carry that out. So now, one of the greatest examples I can think of is probably 4 or 5, 6 years ago, Barbara and I made the decision to come to Los Angeles, California, to come to see some of our relatives. And we didn't do anything to carry out that decision. It was just sure enough, we didn't get to Los Angeles earlier that year. So the second year in a row, we made a decision to come to LA and visit our relatives. Again, we didn't do anything to carry that out. We didn't do that to get to California. Year 3 road, we made the decision. Only this time it was a little different. This time I took the car down and had it serviced, and Barbara picked up the clothes and a little food, and we got in a car and rode from our house from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We drove from Oklahoma City, and then we drove to Amarillo, Texas, and we drove to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Then we drove to Flagstaff, Arizona. Then we drove to Barstow, California. Then we drove to San Bernardino, and then Los Angeles. And by golly, one day we ended up visiting our relatives in LA. Not because we made a decision, because we took the action necessary to carry out that decision. So now what is it that we are deciding to do? Well, we are making a decision to turn our will over to the care and direction of God as we understood him. What is our will? Well, our will is nothing more than our thinking apparatus. Our will is nothing more than our mind. Our will is nothing more than this thing here that tells us what to do and what not to do. A good example of the word will, trying to put it together with mind. Let's say that some of us are beginning to approach the end of our lives, which a few of us here are. And we've gathered up material things and we become concerned about of what's going to happen to them when we pass on. So we'll go down and sit down with an attorney. We'll tell that attorney what we want done with those things. I want this to be my spouse's. This goes to my daughter. I want this to be my son's, etc., etc. Now, that attorney is going to take some thinking from my mind that day and write it down in legal terms and on a piece of paper. I'll sign it. The attorney will sign it. We'll put it in a safe. 3 years later, sure enough, I kick the bucket. My family's mostly likely going to call the undertaker and come and get him and get him ready, and let's take him out to that cemetery about as soon as we can. A couple days later, they gather out at the cemetery. They suspend it over a hole in the ground and they're standing at the hole. Somebody says a few words, gives a little prayer. Hopefully it's someone from AA that does it. When the ceremony's over, they start dropping me down in the hole. If my family's like the rest of them, they're not gonna wait till I get to bottom of the hole. As soon as they start down, they jump in the car and they head for that attorney's office. An attorney gets out the piece of paper and reads them what my thinking was 2 or 3 years ago. And when I was sitting in that office, and they get that piece of paper called a will. It's not an accident. Wow, that's crazy. I did not know that. It's mind-blowing. So will, thinking, and mind are all synonyms. It's very interesting. I'm making a decision to turn my thinking apparatus over to the care of God as I understood him. So what else am I going to turn over? Well, I'm going to turn my life over to the care of God as I understand him in the direction. And what is my life? My life is nothing more than my actions. What I am right now is a moment of a sum of accumulated total of all the actions I've taken through my entire life and has made me what I am today. And that is so true. I say that all the time, how your habits and your actions are what you are. Before I got into this program, my life was a dumpster fire, and that was because I drank every day. And that was what accumulated the total of my life, my actions of drinking every day. When I went into rehab, I didn't really understand why I was there. I didn't really want to be there. I knew I needed help to not drink, but I didn't understand this program yet. Doing rehab every day, all day, all these stupid meetings and stuff, it didn't make sense to me. But what that accumulated to throughout the course of the year, I have over a year sober. So I can definitely attest to this, that like my life is nothing more than my actions. I absolutely love how they put that. And all action is born in thought. So if we can say that again, please, all action is born in thought. All action is born in thought. Sometimes we react to a situation so fast we don't even think about it. We do it automatically. We can't reach out and pick up this cup of water unless my mind tells our body to do so. So if all action is born in thought, then it stands to the reason my life is going to be determined on how I think. Scroll. Sorry, I can't multitask. Reading the book and scrolling is difficult. So if my thinking is okay, chances are my actions will be okay. Chances are my life is going to be okay too. If my thinking is lousy, chances are my actions I take will be lousy, and chances are I'm going to have a fouled up life too. When I got to this stage of the program, I went to my sponsor and I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to take step 3. He said, why not? Said, because if I turn my will and my life over the care of God as I understand him, I have no idea what he would have with me. And then he may want me to be a missionary or send me to China. And I sure as hell don't want to go there. So he just laughed and he said, let's look at it this way. At least it wouldn't be in the hands of an idiot, would it? So, touche. He said, let's look back through your lifetime. He said, you've always been selfish, self-centered, self-will, and a human being. You've always done what you wanted to do whenever you want to do it, and the hell with the rest of them. Isn't that right? You know it is. So at the end of the result of that is you almost destroyed your life. And just as importantly, you've almost destroyed the lives of everyone around you and everyone that cares for you. He said, just think. So if God could direct your thinking, it might become better. And if your thinking becomes better, then your actions and your life is going to become better. And it's just as importantly, the lives of those around you and care for would probably become better too. So, left on your own resources, you're probably always going to do the same thing you've always done. You're going to remain the selfless, restless, irritable, and discontented. You're always going to stay filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse. Sooner or later, those conditions are going to lead you back to drinking again. If you don't find some way to be sober and have a little peace of mind, serenity, and happiness, you'll never have a long lasting sobriety, and you can't do that on self will. And if he made it clear to me in a manner that I was able to make the decision to turn my will, which is the thinking apparatus and my life, which is my actions, over to the care of God as I understand him, it is absolutely amazing what has taken place at that time. So remember in the area of the forward of the first edition where they said precisely, specifically, and clear cut directions. You know, Bill wrote those precise, specific, clear cut directions in the original How It Works, but they forced some changes on him. And when these changes came out, what we will see in the book now are those changes that we make so little continuity of the book and it gets mixed up here. Bill's precise, specific, clear-cut directions were altered a little bit later and he puts them back in the book. So, by the way, as far as we know, we're the only species on Earth that's ever faced this decision. It seems as though the other species on Earth don't have self-will. Whatever they do at any given time is always done on God's time and God's direction. It seems as though as we human beings are the hold on a second, are the only species that God gave this thing called self-will to. There you can see few other species here on Earth in trouble. I've never seen a tree hit a car yet. Just bear with me. I'm gonna see how many pages we have left here. This may continue into next week, but we'll see how fast I can read. So the one thing wrong with self-will is everybody's got one, and that's one of those things wrong with it. Our book says, and he gives us these little instructions on how they're going to come short and sweet and how we have to be prepared to see them. And he says in the big book on page 62, and he's he's going to tell us what to do first. So it says, the first requirement is that we have to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Some people try to live by self-propulsion, even though, each person is like an actor who wants to run the show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If everyone arranges, if his arrangements would only stay put, if only everyone else would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everyone, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody would mind? They won't mind me. They just won't do it because they have self-will. My will for my wife, my children is one thing. Their will for their life is another. They have self-will and their thoughts are different from mine. Sometimes and most of the times they're in conflict. They just won't mind me. I don't know, or I know they'd be a lot better if they wouldn't, but they won't. So now some 12 or 13 years later, after Bill wrote the big book and after many years experience with some great teachers and minds in the world, and after many years of experience with alcoholics, Bill was forced to write the 12 and 12. He was really trying to push the traditions on the fellowship. He was selling the traditions to the fellowship and they weren't buying a lot of it. They needed the traditions and he knew that. So he decided to write the traditions and he thought, we'll put some short stories or essays about the steps in with their traditions and maybe they'll read it and the steps and they'll eventually read the traditions. So he wrote the 12 and 12 for us. The 12 and 12 again is just short essays, short stories about the steps. It doesn't tell you how to work the steps in the short stories or anything. The only piece of literature in AA that tells you how to work the steps is the big books of Alcoholics Anonymous. So in the area of the fourth step in the 12 and 12, there is some of the basic information the world's ever seen on self-will, and it makes people tick. It's called the Basic Instincts of Life. And I always suggest to people that I sponsor that they go get the 12 and 12. Read the first 3 or 4 pages about the basic instincts of life and get a working knowledge about the words and what you see in there and look them up in the dictionary because they're very important words. And we're going to use them a little later on in the third column when we get ready to do the 4-step inventory. So I needed a working knowledge of that information. And Bill, in his usual manner, wrote some of the best information about the basic instincts of life. Very, very important information. Oh, gotta turn the page here. I think that we have to face the fact that in 1937, 38, and 39, when Bill was writing the big book, he was not a spiritual giant. He was not a great student of human nature. Bill was a night school lawyer and a New York City stock speculator, yet he was able to write one of the most spiritual books the world has ever seen with dealing with human nature. Surely, surely, God took a hand in writing part of the big book, and it is used Bill's handwriting to write the book. But by 1950, 51, and 52, Bill knew a lot more about spirituality. He knew a lot more about human nature and a lot more about we alcoholics as he did than he did back in the 30s. He studied with some of the greatest minds in the world for a period of years. And I think that he felt he had some new information that he could give us and would make us easier to work the steps according to the big book. Basically, that's what he says in the 12 and 12. And the big book has always been the basic text and always will be. You simply cannot work the program out of the 12 and 12. I see a lot of people try it, but they can't do it because there's no directions on how to work the steps. And I think that's why a lot of people love it. They can get in it and dance around the philosophies and they never have to do anything except talk. And there's some information in there that is absolutely invaluable. But if we can see it and understand it and accept it, it makes the working of the steps out of the big book so much simpler and so much easier. And these three basic instincts of life that Joe's talking about, he taught me in steps 4 and in the 12 and 12, and more about what makes me tick and what makes me do the things I do and act the way I act. Here he taught me more in 2 or 3 pages than I learned in some 40 years of living at that time. So let's look at them just for a moment. I think it'll make it a lot easier for people to see why we need to make our decision in step 3. Plus it sets us up for really what information we need for step 4. So in your handout sheets, you've got a little picture here in the middle, and somewhere I think it's on page 7 or 8 in your handbook, and it says the basic instincts of life, which create self. And he said, 1, all human beings are born with 3 basic instincts of life. 2, they are God-given. 3, they are absolutely necessary for the survival of human race. And 4, they are a good thing. The first thing he talks about is the social instinct. He said human beings are born with a desire to be liked, to be accepted, and to be respected by other people. All human beings are born with a desire to come together in groups or other people. He said if we didn't have those desires and cared nothing for each other, that the world would go into complete anarchy, dog-eat-dog situation would reign, and eventually those conditions of the human race would fail to survive. Now he said several terms under the social instinct. He uses the term companionship, and that's nothing more than wanting to belong or be accepted. So many of us grew up on the outside of the crowd looking in, wanting to be and knew we could not be. He used the term prestige, that is, wanting to be recognized or to be accepted as the leader of the group. And the world needs leaders. I guess somebody back in the old caveman days had to say, John will get behind that tree with your spear. Jack, you get over there with your club. Mary Jo and I will run this sucker over here and we'll have something. Somebody has to do that. Most people will take one of 2 directions. Either let me be part of or let me be the leader of. And in either case, it's based upon what we think of us. Self-esteem is what we think of ourselves. And that's usually on high or low based upon what other people think of us or what we think of other people. If we seem to like us, or excuse me, if they seem to like us and accept us, we feel good towards ourselves. If it feels like they reject us and they don't want us, then we feel lousy toward ourselves. Pride is, and I'm glad I got in the habit of going to the dictionary. I always thought pride was something you ought to have. All I ever wanted to do is be a young boy growing up and someone who walked tall with pride and just a little bit sideways like John Wayne does. Until I looked in the dictionary and it says pride is an excessive and unjustified opinion of oneself. We either think too well of ourselves or too little of ourselves. In either case, it's not the truth. Personal relationships. Those are the relationships with other human beings in the world around us. Ambitions or plans for the future. So, to be liked, to be accepted, so on and so forth, all human beings have these things. Now, if we want to be liked and accepted and respected by the world and people in it, the first thing we have to do is, well, what do they want from me? Society teaches us those things as we grow up. It's very different in different parts of the world. One part in the world, perhaps, is a good education. Another part of the world is to be a large landowner. Another part of the world is to have a large family. Any number of things based on where we live in the world. And as we grow up, they teach us these things, and we ourselves set goals for ourselves to do what we want to become in the future. And if we're going to reach those goals that we set for ourselves, and we're going to have to work at it. You can't just be a bum and sit on your duff and have a successful life and people like you and accept you. If it's a good education that you're wanting, you're going to have to work for it, whatever that might be. By the same token, we're going to have to make some sacrifices. There are some things that I would really like to do as a human being that are very pleasurable and exciting, that if you catch me at it, you're not going to like me at all. And I don't think you and I would do the work to reach a goal or make necessary sacrifices unless we get a reward for doing so. And the reward, Bill said in the story, when he said, I had arrived. God, how many of us have done that? We set the goal and we literally worked our tails off for years until we reach that goal. And then they pat us in the back and say, oh, Joe, you're a fine fellow. You're a good man. You're doing great. There's a feeling that comes over us, which is indescribably wonderful. A great feeling. And the only thing wrong with it, it seems to just be a temporary feeling. No sooner do we reach the goal, do we get the praise, do we get the recognition, we get the prestige from it. We look around and say, is this all there is to it? And then we set another goal. And we work and strive and we sacrifice and we reach a new goal and praise and recognition, feel great, and it doesn't last long. And then we set another goal. It seems to create with us in human beings this insatiable desire for more and more power, more and more recognition, and we're not going to get it fast enough. And they're not going to give us it the way we think we ought to. And then what do we do about it? Well, we take shortcuts. So we start doing a little lying, a little conning, a little manipulation, a little stepping on people's toes and climbing on their backs. And instantly we create a pain and suffering for others. And in turn, they retaliate against us and they create pain and suffering for us. So it's plain to see that a life run on self-will could hardly ever be a success. Under those conditions, we will always be in collision with people, places, and things. The second basic instinct is what he talked about is the security instinct. Now, I know that in AA, we try to live one day at a time, but I know that just about everybody in the room has an insurance policy. The purpose of the insurance policy is to protect ourselves in the future. Bill said all human beings are born with a desire to secure the future. He said that if we didn't have the desire, we wouldn't provide food, clothing, shelter, the things that we need to survive. And next winter, we would simply freeze to death, or the next drought, we would starve to death. So this desire to have security in the future is a God-given thing, and it is necessary for our survival. So once again, you're going to be secure in the future. You have to decide, well, what is it that I need to be secure? Society usually teaches us those things as we grow up, and it varies in different parts of the world. In one part of the world, you only need $4. In the other part of the world, you need 4,000. In another part of the world, you need 4 million. In another part of the world, you need 198 coconuts. Whatever it is to measure, trade, barter with, based on where you're taught, we set the goals for ourselves and begin to work at it. Now, if you're going to secure the future, you can't just sit on your duff and be a bum. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to make money, and you have to go invest it. At the same time, you have to sacrifice. Hell, we can't blow it all in one day and be secure tomorrow. I don't think you or I would do the work necessary to reach the goal or make the sacrifices necessary if we didn't get a reward. So, once again, the great reward is the great feeling that comes from the moment of successful completion of the goal. How many of us have done that? We set a goal for a new dress, the new shoes, the new suit, the new drapes, the new couch, the new house, new car, the new piece of property, the new business, and we work and strive, and that sucker is paid for, nobody can take it away from us. What a great, great feeling that is. Hell, back when I was a kid, hardly anybody owned their own homes. Once in a great while, somebody would buy a home and they would sacrifice everything they had into it and pay that sucker off. And the day they paid it off, the feeling was so great, and they would call the neighbors and they would have a party and celebrate it by burning the mortgage. Let me just scroll to the next page. Am I on the right page? Hold on. There we go. So no sooner, or wait, by burning the mortgage, how great that was. The only thing wrong with it is just a temporary feeling. So no sooner got the sucker paid off and they looked around his house and it's bigger than mine. He has a Cadillac and I'm driving a Chevrolet. He's got Brooks Brothers suit and I got mine at Kmart. And that causes us to set another goal. We work and we strive and we reach through the new goal and it feels good and it doesn't last long and we set another. Seems to create this insatiable desire for more and more and more and more. And we're not getting it fast enough. And we're not giving it to us like we think they should. So what do? We take shortcuts. We lie, we cheat, we con, we manipulate, and we The instant we do, we hurt people. They retaliate against us, creating pain and suffering for us. It's plain to see that a life on self-will can hardly be a success. Now, the third basic instinct he talks about is the sex instinct. He said, all human beings are born with the desire to have sex. Now, it may get turned off by bad teachings or bad happenings, but he said all human beings are born with the desire to have sex because if we don't, we can't reproduce ourselves. And if we don't reproduce ourselves, sooner or later, the human race is going to fail to survive. So just like the other two, you're going to reproduce yourself through the sexual act. You're going to have to work at it. Hell, you can't do it in 3 minutes of sex. If you can't last that long, then what are you going to do all day? Digging a ditch? Don't you older fellows remember how it used to be when you got through it? My God, you just fall over sideways, the sweat pouring off your back, and you can hardly catch your breath. You feel like you've died, gone to heaven, and come back 2 or 3 times. Gets excited, doesn't he? And don't you think I would have that kind of work if we didn't get a reward from doing so? And the great reward for that feeling is we both get physically and emotionally at the moment of the successful completion of the sex act. So one of the greatest rewards in the human being can be it is one of the greatest rewards that a human being can experience. But also like the other two, it seems to be just a temporary feeling. Hell, you no sooner get through it, and then you get to think about doing it again. And it's such a pleasurable and exciting thing that you know you get to think about it and do it in different ways. And then you get to think about it and do it in different positions and doing it with different people. Next thing you know, you're doing it at the wrong time in the wrong way with the wrong people. And instant we create pain and suffering from others. And they return and retaliate against us, which creates pain and suffering for us. So it is plain to see that a life run on self-will can hardly be a success. The fulfillment of these things are so pleasurable that all human beings from time to time will overdo one or more of these areas and create pain and suffering for others. You'll notice on the little chart that there's a circle called self, and that's where self-will comes from. It comes from these three basic instincts of life. You notice coming out of these circle because there is one called wrongs, which is another word we need to look at. And we are at it is 1 o'clock, so we have quite a few pages that we need to get through next week. So we'll briefly continue on this next week. And then we'll start with the week 8 assignment, which is chapter 5. And that looks like a little bit shorter of a week as far as materials. So I think we'll be able to get the rest of this done and week 8 done next week. Thank you.